Hi, this is Jason with Orchid Web, and take a look at this beautiful Paphiopedilum Maudiae hybrid in flower. Looks very healthy. Why does it look this nice? It's been properly maintained. So one of the things I'll go over with you today is just a basic repotting video of how we repot our Paphiopedilum to keep them looking nice. You can grow them in different types of materials based on your environment. Here we have one in sphagnum moss, here we have one in bark. Either of these materials work well. The main difference is moss stays wet a little longer than bark. Some people choose bark because you can water it more frequently and they like to water often. Some people prefer moss because you can let it sit for several more days without needing to water. So let's start out with this Paphiopedilum Maudiae bankhouse, good old classic. The moss is getting kind of old. I see algae and other mosses growing on top. Not a horrible thing, but it is getting old. Even some little ferns are starting up. So removing dead leaves, they usually fall off quite easily. By the way, these plants grow sympodially, so they'll grow off of each new growth. So when it's done flowering, the old growth will slowly die off. But the first thing we need to do is just kind of wiggle and pull, and the moss will kind of just fall right off in most cases. And at the base here, if you see any old material, you can usually just wiggle and pull that off as well. And once we've cleaned it up at the base, I'll just take some water here and rinse it off. You want to start with a clean slate. Now for the repot, let me show you a couple styles of containers. I choose, at this nursery, the low drainage container versus a high drainage. Why? Because they hold water longer, and these are terrestrials which never like to dry out. I find that these containers in our nursery dry too quickly, we need to water too often, and really the last thing I need here is more labor. So we want to keep it easy. And I'm going to go ahead and choose sphagnum moss. That's what it was growing in before. Another reason I can tell you why that moss was old, I don't see new root tips on this, so it wasn't very active, so it was probably ready. The old potting mix becomes acidic, and once it's acidic, you won't get any new roots. Here we have fresh New Zealand sphagnum moss. I get it wet and I wring it out, and now it's nice and light and fluffy. That's what I want. And we're going to wrap around the root system here, bearing in mind that you never want to cover the base of the plant. If it's green, it should be above the ground. If you bury the crown, as they call this base here, you can get crown rot, and then you lose your entire plant and you have to go buy another one. So let's try to keep this healthy. Someone must be breaking into my car right now, but I don't let that bother me. I'm just going to continue to repot this plant. And here we have a ball of sphagnum moss about the same size as this 3 1/4 inch pot. It should drop in nicely. I've done this a million times, so I can get it right the first time. And with practice, you can too. But we get it in there snug. You can see I can pick up the base of the plant. Nothing's going anywhere. Orchids like to be snug after the repot. That will help them develop the new root system much faster. So put the label back, and it is a great idea to write the date of the repot on the back of the label so you can keep track of things. Usually with sphagnum moss, it's good for 1 to 2 years tops. Most people say 1 to 1.5 years. So there's that example. Now to show you this one, we'll repot this into bark because that option is there. And this one needs a little more cleanup. The bark falls off real quick and easy. Any dead root is typically hollow, mushy, brown to blackish in color. And here you see an active root tip. That's a good sign. You want to see some active root tips when you're repotting. Here you can see an old flower stem. Here's some old leaves. They're turning yellow. Let's just cut these off. And when I cut things, I will use a pruning shears And here I have a little butane torch that when I'm not using for creme brulee, I'm using to sterilize my shears with. If you don't have a blowtorch, you can use alcohol or bleach. You have to soak in bleach for at least 10 minutes for it to be effective. I would say 10% bleach is enough. For alcohol, you can dip in, I would say for 5 to 10 minutes should be good enough. But really, the blowtorches are great because they're super fast and efficient. Rinsed off this root system now. Normally I do this at a sink, but for this video, I just have my plant studio here. Now let's go ahead and remove this old growth. It's really not contributing much anymore because it's turning yellow and it looks way better without it. Take off these old growths, spikes I should say. And there we have a nice clean looking plant ready for repotting. I am going to use, well, I don't recommend using the same pot. Use a clean pot. We wash and reuse our old containers. Even though this root system fits right back into there again, it was not ready for a larger pot. These paphs like to stay root bound, so keep them as tight as possible. If it was a solid, dense mass of roots that just wouldn't go back in, that's when it's time to use the next container size. Here we have pine bark mix. We use pine bark, perlite, and charcoal. This is kind of a blend of medium and small. I find that's kind of a good mix for paphs. Drop in the mix, tap it in. It just falls right into the container. Quite easy. Gently press the bark on top. You don't want to jam it in. You don't want to break the root system. They have sensitive roots, so pot gently. And there we have a beautiful plant in a new container. When you're done, the last step is to water your plants. Because paphs are terrestrials, they never want to go dry. New mix tends to dry quickly at the beginning. So let's wash this through till the water runs clear. And there we have a plant that here probably won't need water for another 5 to 7 days. Now we'll water the plant in moss. Moss sucks up water like a sponge. It can get very wet and very heavy. So if you don't have good airflow, you may not want to completely soak it. You may want to give it just a little bit of water so it gets slightly moist. It really depends on your environment. I like to go by weight. If it feels heavy, it's wet. If it feels light, it's dry. You can stick your finger in too to give you an idea. But if you do this with your Paphiopedilum at least every 1 to 2 years, you should be able to maintain a nice healthy foliage system. And with that, you'll be able to flower them. They usually flower once to twice a year, so they're very rewarding and they have very beautiful leaves. So with some practice, you can probably do it just as good as I did, and happy growing.